Few, if any, philosophers have influenced the culture they lived in as much as Confucius has influenced Chinese culture. Professor Huston Smith has put it this way. He said that no one claims that Confucius crafted Chinese culture single-handedly, but that Confucius was its supreme editor. Confucius was born in 551 BC, approximately 500 years before Jesus, and he died at age 72 in the year 479 BC. We know Confucius primarily through a book entitled The Analects. The Analects, that's capital A-N-A-L-E-C-T-S. The Analects is a book put together by Confucius' disciples, and essentially it consists of sayings by Confucius. The Analects is considered to be the most reliable record of Confucius' teachings. This book has been as widely read in China as has the Bible in the Western world. And as I indicated, it's the only reliable source of his teachings. Confucius lived at a time of much violence and social anarchy. Society was becoming unglued. From an early age, Confucius was devoted to learning, and he spent his life as a teacher and also at other times as a local government administrator. Indeed, with regard to his teaching career, Confucius is generally credited with establishing the first private school in China devoted to higher learning. Confucius was primarily a philosopher of morals. He said this. Confucius said that the only purpose a man can have, and the only worthwhile thing a person can accomplish, is to be as good a person as possible. And according to Confucius, why should one try to be moral, to be decent, to be virtuous? Well, his approach is quite different from that of Christianity and some of the major religions, in that Confucius did not speak about rewards and punishments, God, or hereafter. Indeed, when one of Confucius' disciples asked him about death, Confucius responded in this way. He told his disciple, he said, "You do not even understand life, and therefore, how can you understand death?" Again, Professor Huston Smith provides some illumination. In his superb essay on Confucius, he says that Confucius believed that somewhere in the universe there is a power on the side of righteousness. Again, somewhere in the universe there is a power on the side of righteousness. And it follows from this that the spread of righteousness is a cosmic demand. Incidentally, there have been more than a few famous thinkers in history who believed something similar, who again believe that there is a power in the universe on the side of goodness. Buddha, Plato, Immanuel Kant, the American Ralph Waldo Emerson, all believe this. Indeed, Kant, perhaps the most famous of European modern philosophers, put it this way. Kant said, "We have a need to be moral, regardless of whether there is a God or hereafter." Again, we have an inner need to be moral, regardless of whether there is a God or hereafter. What do you think? Confucius defined wisdom as knowledge of humankind. In other words, Confucius believed that if a person was a wise person, that person had a good understanding of human nature, which of course includes understanding oneself as well as other people. Confucius defined virtue as the love of humankind. According to Confucius, what is the most important quality a human being can cultivate? Well, he believed it's Chen. That's C-H-E-N, that's J-E-N. It's a Chinese word, and it's translated into English in various ways, but among the translations are benevolence and goodness. Again, Confucius believed that benevolence and goodness are the most important qualities that any human being could cultivate. How does one go about cultivating these qualities? Well, you do it in several ways. First, one should attempt to overcome one's self-centeredness. Confucius believed that authentic humanity evolves to the extent that blind egoism erodes. One also cultivates benevolence by growing in empathy, by growing in fellow feeling for one's human beings, other human beings. He believed that the capacity to measure the feelings of others by one's own is really what empathy is all about. I'll say that again. Confucius believed that what empathy really consists of is the capacity to measure the feelings of others by one's own. In other words, if one feels nervous, sad, anxious, insecure, joyful, inadequate, confident, whatever feelings we have, we can be pretty confident other human beings have. This reminds me of Sigmund Freud. Freud believed that if we are to understand other individuals better, if we are to understand our wives, our children, our students, our friends better, it's so important that we understand ourselves better. That understanding others begins with self-understanding. Confucius believed that also. With regard to empathy, Confucius believed that we must continually grow in empathy, that we must have feelings for our family, but those feelings must be extended to our friends, fellow citizens, and the world. Confucius believed that all people are our brothers and sisters. And again, he said this approximately 500 years before Jesus. Do you believe, as Confucius believed, that there is a connection between empathy and morality? Again, do you believe there is a connection between empathy and morality? The idea is that morality begins with empathy. Empathy results in compassion, and compassion leads to people treating other people decently. What was Confucius' prescription for making the world a better place? Well, essentially, his prescription involved 3 steps, or 3 ingredients, one might say. The first step to making the world better involves making oneself better. The core idea of Confucianism, that the transformation of the world begins with one's self-transformation. The second step in making the world a better place is moral example. Confucius believed that parents, teachers, politicians, businessmen have an obligation to set an example of moral behavior, and that if the leaders in our society, if the shapers of personality in our society do their job in setting a good example for other people, that will contribute to making the world a better place. Thirdly, Confucius believed that governments must ensure that the people they rule, that the needs of the people they rule have been met, specifically the material needs, the physical needs. Confucius believed that it's no use teaching morality to people if their physical needs have not been met. On the subject of good government, in the Analects, a book I alluded to before, again, it's a book which includes the most reliable, which is the most reliable source of Confucius' teachings. In the Analects, a ruler approaches Confucius, and the ruler of a state in China asks Confucius, "What must I do to get the common people to look up to me?" And here is Confucius' response. He said, "Set the straight over the crooked, and the common people will look up to you. But if you set the crooked over the straight, the common people will not look up to you." So again, Confucius is saying, make sure you appoint people to high positions who are virtuous people. And if you do that, that's going to contribute enormously to getting the people to follow you. It's interesting that I suspect that The kind of official, I suspect the kind of official Confucius would not want appointed to an important position, perhaps any position in government, would be a person some people would describe as a kiss up, kick down kind of person. Kiss up, kick down kind of person. The kind of person who sucks up to those above him and kicks those below him. I think we have all met those kinds of people. Unfortunately, I think one finds them in virtually every office in the world, virtually every factory in the world, school and university, and government in the world. Confucius believed it is better for government leaders and others to lead by moral example than by strict punishments and laws. What do you think about that? Again, is it better to lead by moral example than by strict laws and punishments? In other words, is moral example by politicians more effective in creating an orderly society than strict laws and punishments? Was Confucius naive? Other thinkers, including Machiavelli, Aristotle, Hobbes, Freud, all had a more negative view of human nature. Indeed, Machiavelli, in perhaps the most famous book ever written in political science, a book called The Prince, Machiavelli claimed that ideally government leaders should be both loved and feared. But Machiavelli said usually that's not possible. And if a leader has a choice of being either loved or feared, it's better to be feared. Again, what do you think? This also reminds me of what might be a difference between liberals and conservatives in our society. It's been said by some academics that one of the differences between liberals and conservatives is that when liberals go to vote, they often wish to elect a politician whom they perceive in one way or another as being a nurturing mother. Whereas it's been said that when conservatives go to vote, very often they desire to vote for a politician whom they perceive to be a strict father. Again, liberals, nurturing mother; conservatives, strict father. What do you think? Another criticism that's been leveled at Confucius is that some people believe that the masses of people need to believe in God to be virtuous. Confucius did not believe that. Remember what I said early on in my presentation, that Confucius did not talk about a hereafter, did not talk about rewards and punishments after death, did not talk about God. And therefore, Confucius did believe that the leaders of a country could get the masses to behave themselves well without any supernatural power. Voltaire, very famous French philosopher, I think it's fair to say, would disagree with Confucius. Voltaire said this, and this is one of my favorite quotes concerning God and religion. Voltaire said, "If God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him." For the benefit of those who tuned in late, you're watching Life, Love, and Philosophy. This segment is entitled Confucius, Great Teacher and Philosopher. And this program can be seen on Channel 35 at 10 p.m. on Sundays, and it's repeated on Tuesdays at 8:30 p.m. What was Confucius' view of human nature? Did he believe more in the idea of nurture or nature? Well, Confucius believed that human beings are essentially, are to a very considerable extent, made what they are by society. Let me say that again. Confucius believed that men are essentially social beings and that they are to a very considerable extent, though by no means totally, made what they are by society. In other words, Confucius would come down more on the side of nurture rather than nature in terms of what is the most important influence on human beings. Confucius, therefore, believed that government should provide universal education, Confucius believed that education was more important than punishment in trying to get people to behave themselves well. And what did Confucius believe should be a person's guide, moral guide, to daily living? Well, Confucius, again more than 500 years before Jesus, articulated the golden rule. He said this, and I'm quoting Confucius, "Do not impose on others what you yourself do not desire. Do not impose on others what you yourself do not desire." I think one of the things almost all people know about Confucius is the emphasis he placed on family. Confucius believed that good families made up the foundation of a healthy society. Confucius believed that parents should be loving and children should be reverential. He believed that respect of children for parents was the key to a good society. Indeed, he said this, "The duty of children to their parents is the fountain from which all virtues spring." Again, the duty of children to their parents is the fountain from which all virtues spring. And what are the consequences of the importance of respect of children for parents? Well, we know that in Chinese culture, old people are generally respected perhaps as much, if not more, than in any other area of the world. We know that Chinese culture has traditionally reduced the terrors of aging, and that elderly people are made to feel at ease in China. Confucius was concerned not just with the relationships concerning family, but also with other relationships. Indeed, Confucius believed that we express our spirituality through relationships. And among the most important relationships Confucius speaks of, besides parent and child, are husband and wife, elder sibling and junior sibling, and elder friend to young friend. Confucius' emphasis on correct relationships puts everyday life at the center of spirituality. It's interesting that in the Western world, when people talk about spirituality, one of the things people often emphasize, again in the Western world, is one's relationship with God. Whereas in China, when Confucius spoke of spirituality, he did not emphasize a person's relationship to God, but rather the way in which people relate to other people. And his idea was that if people relate well, if people relate decently to other people, that's a manifestation of their spirituality. It should also be mentioned, with regard to China and religion, that traditionally in China, it has not been unusual for people to follow 2 or even 3 different religions. For example, it has not been unusual in China for a person to be a Buddhist, a Taoist, and a Confucianist to varying degrees. I mentioned that Confucius is considered to be a great teacher, and that he established what is generally considered to be the first school of higher education in China. Let me talk a little bit about Confucius' method of teaching, since again he was a teacher for much of his life. Confucius believed that the best way of teaching involved the Socratic dialogue. In other words, asking important questions. He emphasized critical thinking and self-discovery. Let me quote him. Confucius said, "If, when I give the student one corner of a subject, he cannot find the other 3 for himself, I do not repeat my lesson." Confucius also believed that the aim of learning was practical knowledge. Confucius believed it wasn't enough to memorize a lot of information in school, but rather what was more important was to jump the gap from memorizing to critical thinking and being able to apply what one learns to everyday living. Confucius was not dogmatic in his teaching, And again, he insisted that students think for themselves, and he refused to insist on certainty. Confucius did not claim to have the ultimate truth. In this sense, he is much like Socrates and so many philosophers in the Western tradition. Confucius believed that among the aids to learning, among the important learns to learning, are good relationships. He talked a lot about friendship. And on the subject of friendship, Confucius said this: "Do not accept as friend anyone who is not as good as you." He also believed that if we are to be good students and if we are to live well, we should avoid too much conformity. In the Analects, one of Confucius' disciples asks Confucius about the good man, the virtuous man. And Confucius says this about such a person, and I'm quoting Confucius: "Such a man does not follow in other people's footsteps." Confucius also believed that we should not strive to be popular, that we should not strive to be popular. Again, in the Analects, one of his disciples says to Confucius, "I know of somebody in a village near here whom everybody likes." Confucius said, "That's not enough." The disciple then said, "Well, I know of somebody else in the same village whom nobody likes." Confucius said, "That's not enough." The disciple was somewhat perplexed, and then Confucius tried to clear up the confusion of the student. Confucius said this: "It would be better to be liked by good people and disliked by bad people." Confucius believed that the most important thing in learning about oneself was to be honest with oneself. Confucius, like Freud, believed that human beings have a tendency to lie to themselves, and that if we are going to be good students, if we are going to learn about ourselves and learn about others and learn about life, it's quite important that we try not to lie to ourselves. Confucius attached a lot of importance to music. Indeed, Confucius was deeply interested in music, and he believed that the music of a culture indicates whether that country's culture is sound or unsound. Professor Karl Jaspers, a German professor, incidentally, who was a scholar concerning Confucius, he said that Confucius believed the spirit of the community is formed by the music it hears. Again, Confucius believed the spirit of the community is formed by the music it hears. Confucius, like Plato, believed the influence of music on society is so great that music should be censored. That's right. Confucius believed music should be censored. And according to Confucius, what should be the main purpose of music? Well, he said that music should bring out the essential goodness in man's nature. He said that good music should elevate the hearts of the people. Tolstoy, by the way, believed something similar. And what determines whether a piece of music is acceptable? Well, according to Confucius, its moral quality will determine whether a piece of music is acceptable. In other words, if music promotes morality in society, well then Confucius would say it's good music. If music has the opposite effect, if music promotes immorality in society, Confucius would conclude it's not good music. Confucius believed there is a connection between music and the manners of the people in society. Let me give you his own words. Confucius said this: "For changing people's manners and customs, there is nothing better than music. For changing people's manners and customs, there is nothing better than music." Plato believed the same thing. In fact, Plato, 500 years after Confucius, in talking about the influence of music on young people, Plato said that music influences how young people dress and how young people comport themselves. Recently, there was a New York Times op-ed piece about hip-hop music, written by New York Times editorialist Brent Staples. And Mr. Staples criticized rap music. And here's what he said, and I'm quoting him. Rap music, which started out with a broad palette of themes, has increasingly evolved into a medium for worshiping misogyny, materialism, and murder. What do you think? If this is true, I suggest to you that Confucius would not approve of rap music. Again, I don't pretend to be a student of rap music, but I thought it would be interesting to talk about what this New York Times writer had to say about it, because I think it fits in neatly with this program in terms of stimulating one's thinking about the influence of music. According to Confucius, how do we measure the success of a country? Well, Confucius said we measure the success of a country by examining its culture. Specifically, how its people treat other people, and how its people treat people in the rest of the world. And also, if we want to determine if a country has a healthy culture, we look at the level of its art and philosophy. What do you think Confucius would think of American culture? How do we treat each other? How do we treat the rest of the world? Can Americans be proud of our television, movie, and music industries? Allow me to sum up now. Most scholars consider Confucius to be the most important figure in Chinese history. His influence has also been strongly established in Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. In what ways? Well, in all of those countries, great stress is put on the importance of the family. In all of those countries, great stress is put on the work ethic. Indeed, China, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea have all been in the forefront of economic growth, and many people attribute that in part to the influence of Confucianism on those countries. And of course, in all of those cultures, everyday courtesy and relating in a courteous way to other people is very much stressed. Allow me to give scholar Houston Smith the last word. Professor Smith has said, no one claims that Confucius crafted Chinese culture single-handedly, but he was its supreme editor. Professor Smith goes on to say that for years the communists in China criticized Confucianists, but in the last few years, they've changed their attitude towards Confucius, and Professor Smith says that Confucianism is back in Chinese public schools. Finally, I wish to conclude with a quote from Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau in Walden wrote the following: "To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts.